I have a great deal of respect for MV Agusta as a motorcycle manufacturer because I think they are one of the only companies out there that stayed true to their original ideology and philosophy since day one to today without changing a thing about how they do their business model, despite the fact that it has cost them a lot in the long term. They've always been this close to bankruptcy, and that's because of this particular reason. They continue to produce the prettiest, most exclusive, most prestigious motorcycles out there, and the result is they are very, very expensive, and as a result of that, nobody can afford their bikes, and as a result of that, they don't make that much money. And that's what I respect about them. Despite that, despite being really not profitable, they continue to do things their way. And today we get a chance, an opportunity to review one of their newer models, this 2023 MV Agusta F3R Rosso Ago. And now that I'm standing next to it and talking about it, I feel very underdressed. So give me a second, I'll be right back. So let's go wheel to wheel and everything in between on this 2023 MV Agusta F3R Rosso Ago and see what you can expect from an 800cc motorcycle that costs roughly $21,000 out the door. Then we're gonna get on it, go out there and see if the performance of this bike matches the looks. Then I'm gonna quantify my thoughts and give this bike my Emmy score. Let's start by talking about what's under the hood, what's powering this F3R Rosso Ago. You have a 798cc triple-cylinder engine that makes a claimed 147 horsepower at the crank and about 65 foot-pounds of torque. These are claimed numbers by MV Agusta. I don't know how accurate they are, but we're going to put this motorcycle to some sort of test during the right section of this video. Anyways, you can't see any of the pipes out of the header coming out of this engine. This bike is just covered in fairings that are beautifully painted red, but when you get to see it is when it joins the catalytic converter, which you get a big one. I wish MV Agusta had done what Japanese bikes these days are doing, which is making the catalytic converter slimmer from side, but extending it out underneath the bike. So essentially compacting the boxy shape into a tablet. So at least from the side, you don't get to see a huge catalytic converter. But anyways, what it's redeemed by is just a couple inches to the left of it, the MV Agusta's famous exhaust mufflers on this one and on the F4. These were famous for being beautiful, and it's no exception here. It looks gorgeous on this F3. You'd be a fool if you take this system off and replace it with an aftermarket slip-on. Even though it gives you the advantage of taking that catalytic converter off, I would still probably not do it because not only does it look really beautiful in this bronze finish, it also sounds amazing. So take a listen to the 2024 F3R Rosso Ago. Now let's talk design on this F3R, which is probably its most important attribute and why MV Agusta can get away with charging $20,000 for an 800cc motorcycle. It's a really pretty bike. You can see that it has a lot of borrowed elements from its bigger brother, bigger in size and also bigger in age, the F4. The headlight is borrowed from the F4, the way the front fairing generally looks, the windshield and even the ram air intakes are borrowed from the F4. It looks like a smaller F4 essentially, which is the looks they were going for. They wanted to have this larger super sport and the smaller 800cc motorcycle to call them F4 and F3. In fact, let's actually talk about the naming for a second. F in F4, the older, bigger brother, came from Ferrari. It's short for Ferrari, and that's a tribute to Ferrari. When they were designing the engine on MV Agusta, they essentially got the inspiration and the model and the original blueprint from Ferrari's engines, hence why they called the F4 F, and 4 because the number of cylinders. It was an inline 4, the engine derived from a Ferrari engine, so it became F4. In a similar fashion, this motorcycle is called F3 because of the F-inspired engine, Ferrari-inspired engine, and because it's got 3 cylinders. But anyways, those are the elements that are borrowed from the F4, including the mirrors. The mirrors are also from the F4. There is a bit of cost cutting here. This one is plastic painted. This one is plastic colored. The F4 was body painted, the mirrors on the F4. So it looked a little higher end. Generally, the F4 looked a little higher end overall compared to the F3, but also it cost a lot more. That motorcycle is $10,000, $12,000 more expensive, although it's discontinued now. When it was being built parallel to this F3, it was $10,000, $12,000 more expensive. And one cool thing about these mirrors is that they have this built-in spoiler in them. You can see this piece that's supposedly levitating over the mirrors. Their job is to just let wind pass through underneath them and create a good amount of downforce. You also see this tiny dot, this tiny hole punctured into the mirrors to let water drain, which is just, you know, typical MV Agusta attention to details. As for technology on this motorcycle, you get a good package. It's not just all about looks. You also get a good, compelling package of tech features on this motorcycle, starting with this large TFT screen, a 5.5-inch TFT screen that has a Bluetooth connectivity ability to your mobile phone. You can download the MV Ride app, which has a really horrible score on App Store for some reason. You can download that, and then you can GPS track your motorcycle in case you lose it. You can also change the ride modes via your phone on this motorcycle. I don't know how useful that is. I generally find it easier just to change modes using the buttons that are on the handlebar rather than pulling my phone out, going into the app, connecting it to the motorcycle, and then change the ride modes. But that's a possibility. You can do that. You also have a quick shifter on this motorcycle, up and down. You also get launch control and cruise control and traction control and ABS on this motorcycle. You get the full package essentially. There's nothing you don't have. You also have a front levitating prevention function on here, which is just a fancy way of saying anti-wheelie on this motorcycle. You get all of that for obviously not a little amount of money that you paid for this bike, but you get everything. Now let's talk about where the F3 lands in MV Agusta's lineup. When you go to the Super Sport category, up until 2018, you could have picked between the F3 and the F4. With the cancellation of the F4, it is replaced now with Super Veloci, which comes in an 800cc or 1000cc configuration, but that doesn't look modern like this one. The design choice made on that motorcycle is like a World War II airplane turned into a motorcycle. It looks pretty old, but if you want to get a modern super sport motorcycle from MV Agusta, this is essentially your only option, but it comes in 3 trims. You get 3 trims to pick from: the F3R, the F3RR, and the F3RC. Their biggest difference essentially is price. This one being the base model is $19,300. For $5,000 extra, for $24,300, you can get the F3RR. It differs in color and in number of carbon fiber panels on it, and the suspensions on the RR and the RC are coated with a non-friction layer, so that suspension performance is a little better than this one, but that's really it. Colors, carbon fiber, and coating on the suspension is really the only differences you get between this bike and the 2 more expensive versions, the RR and the RC. The color on this one is called a Rosso Ago, that I've been calling it this whole time. Rosso is the only part that means a color. It means red in Italian. Ago is short for Agostini, Giacomo Agostini, the famous Italian MotoGP motorcycle racer. In honor of his name, they named this bike Rosso Ago, so that's where the Ago part in Rosso Ago comes from. But anyways, you only get this motorcycle in this color, and you better like it. And honestly, there's nothing to dislike about this paint. With all of that said and done, I think you and I are ready to take this motorcycle out on the road and give it a test. But before we do that, a huge huge shout out to Bellevue Motorsports for allowing this to happen, for giving us this MV Agusta F3R to take a peek around it, to show you guys all around this motorcycle and to test it out on the road and to finalize my thoughts and give it my ME score. Go check out Bellevue Motorsports in the description section of this video. I will leave a link to this bike as well as their homepage so you can check out the rest of the lineup they carry. And with all of that, let's go and ride this bike. The biggest difference between the F3 and the F4 for me is ergonomics, because I could not flat foot the F4. It was a very large bike and very heavy too, but this one super light and I can flat foot it, so that's good news, huh? So this is quick shifter, up and down, good. Sounds really good. One design flaw that I found is these two switches doing the exact same thing, rocking left and right, being within an inch of one another. That's kind of annoying, but I guess your muscle memory will take over at some point and know which one is turn signal, which one is menu scroll. Capable. This bike is as fun as the F4 in a different way. That one is more captivating of a motorcycle to ride around town, but this one is performance wise superior to that one. You can actually use the power this gives you over the F4. Compared to other European bikes, I would say MV Agusta does make it a little difficult for you to own an MV Agusta. Lack of dealerships, there are very few and far in between, lack of parts and service support, lack of initiative. MV Agusta doesn't have any financing departments. They don't really care whether you get it or not. They're there for those who really are thirsty for an MV Agusta. Whereas Ducati, for example, makes it very convenient for you to own a Ducati. In fact, some of the Ducati models are discounted heavily, as well as low APR, so you can take them home. MV Agusta never does that. MV Agusta never becomes a common commodity you and I can afford easily. It has to be a long-term plan to own one of these.
And now, onto the ME score for the 2023 MV Agusta F3R Rosso Ago. In the commuter category, the F3 gives you LED lighting for better visibility, a fairly large 5.5-inch TFT screen, a large windscreen, cruise control, ABS, slipper clutch, and a water and oil-cooled engine that can help you in heavy traffic. The F3 costs a lot. The base model costs $19,300 before taxes and fees, and there are very few dealerships across the country to hook you up with parts and labor, but at least modern MV Agustas are much more reliable than they used to be. The F3R earns a 14 out of 20 in the commuter category. Now onto the performance/dope factor category. As for track-specific tech and features, you get a lot of goodies. You get traction control, front levitating control, quick shifter both up and down directions, launch control, and race-ready ergonomics, paired with functioning design characteristics like the flying buttresses up front and ram air vents in the rear seat. The F3R has a healthy power plant. It makes roughly 132 horsepower at the rear wheel and 65 foot-pounds of torque, and you can't get enough of its triple-cylinder engine screaming down the freeway. Sitting at 381 pounds wet, the bike is pretty average for its category, and combined with the mentioned power figures, it is a pretty healthy power-to-weight ratio. As for the design choices and marketplace, this is where the F3 really shines. The F3R technically comes in one color, but there are more available options if you bump it up to the RR and or the RC versions. MV Agusta's design is pretty much undisputably beautiful. It is where you get looks and functionality all in one package. The F3R that I reviewed, however, is the base model and it isn't a special or limited production product. The F3R gets a 16 out of 20 for the overall performance and dope factor category, and it sits here on the list of other sport bikes I have reviewed. On paper, Kawasaki and Suzuki beat this F3R simply because they cost $8,000, have a much stronger dealership support, and the reliability is not questionable. But this bike gives you something none of those other ones do, and that's the wow factor. This bike will turn heads. It will make people stop and ask you questions about it. It starts conversations. It makes people wish they had one. So if that's what you're looking for, great, because that's exactly what an MV Agusta is made for.